Hello. Hi all. This is Juha from Ellie, and we are just about to start in a few minutes. Let me actually get a slide up there. We had a small issue with some links that we sent out just a few minutes ago. Glad to see that some people are still in here. Good. But just a minute or two and we'll get started with the webinar. All right. Let's get started. Welcome all. My name is Juha. I'm from Ellie Technologies, and today we're going to be talking about business-driven data vault. I have here with me Cindy Meyersohn from the US. We'll run through some brief introductions in a moment. A couple of words about today's webinar and its agenda here first. So I'll do some introductions there, and after that Cindy and I will discuss a few topics. This is not going to be a dialogue. It's not going to be a no. It is going to be a dialogue. It's not going to be a monologue, and it's not going to be us just preaching here. We're going to be discussing these topics, and as you get ideas, you get questions, you're perfectly free and even encouraged to write down questions in the chat. We'll have our helpful Ellie team members there reading the chat and picking up good questions. And in the end, we'll answer those questions, or at least as many of them as we have time for, after we've done the sort of normal and formal parts of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, of course, and it will be made available, I suppose, sometimes next week on Ellie's YouTube site. I think that's about it. We are going to be a few minutes late of the schedule right now, but we should be done with this thing at about in an hour, which would be like 5 o'clock Helsinki time and various clocks of your time around the world. Right. Without further nonsense, let's get started. And I have the honor and privilege to present to you Cindy Meyersohn. Hi, Cindy.
Hi, Juha. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here. So Cindy is one of the great data vault trainers and experts around the world. We've been working with Cindy for a while now and helping with her demos in Finland. And I've been doing also a couple of small things with Cindy's trainings in the US. And Cindy is the founder and president of Data Rebels and the chief operating officer of Data Vault Alliance. Cindy, would you like to say some words about yourself?
Sure. Just a brief background for those who don't know me. I've got about 35 years of IT experience, and I've been doing Data Vault for probably close to 8 years now, implementing inside the Department of Defense. So, yeah, it's been an answer to prayer. So, anyway. I was just to say one other thing. I'm gonna put in a plug for Data Vault Alliance. We do have a conference coming up, so I would encourage you to go out to www.dvc.com and check out the schedule. It's all virtual this year. So our topics this year, interestingly enough, are all on AI, machine learning, and Juha, as you may know, Hanu is going to be one of our keynote speakers, as well as Ellie. So we are really excited to have them on the conference as note speakers. So
that's perfect, and we will have the link also in the slide deck that will be made available sometime after this recording is put to YouTube, so you can find the links also there. Thank you, Cindy, for that. a quick word about myself. I'm the Chief Product Officer of Ellie Technologies, as it shows there. And I've been with Ellie since last year, doing this data modeling and data warehousing stuff for the last decade now here in Finland. And my responsibility in Ellie is the product roadmap, basically the development direction in which we are taking this tool. This is, however, not going to be a presentation about what Ellie is and what it does. I will show you a brief demo of a thing or two. We will be focusing on the kind of philosophy behind Ellie and the Data Vault methodology and how these basically link together. So let's move on. Let's get started with today's topics. First, we'll go through some basics of kind of business-driven data thinking. So what do we mean by that? The business-driven data being kind of the tagline that Ellie uses a lot. And the Data Vault methodology that Cindy represents here and what that actually means. I think the key message today about this is going to be that Data Vault is much more than perhaps the database schemas that you're accustomed to. It's a whole fully fledged paradigm of business-driven thinking. But first, a couple of words about business-driven data and business-driven data thinking in general. So what we want to make certain here that you all hear and understand is that we think that data is always something about the business, and you cannot actually do anything with data unless you understand what the business is about. And this is actually more about the information content of that business and those processes rather than tables and so on. Isn't that right, Cindy?
Right. One thing that people don't tend to understand is that the Data Vault, first of all, is and always has been focused on the business, because we believe that if you start with the business, then what you build is what the business is asking for, which is an integrated view of their data and taking that data and actually curating it and generating information, which is really what the business needs. So that has always been our focus.
Absolutely, and we are also saying here that integrating the different kind of granular physical data things around the organization into something that tells you about the whole process and what your business is actually doing, that integration of that information is the actually valuable part of this. And by doing this integration work, we are actually giving something that has meaning and can be linked to those business targets and the kind of actual money part of the business rather than just doing the technology. One point that we're going to also be making is to agility. So agile is, of course, a fancy word, but the point here is that the whole Data Vault methodology and the business-driven thinking behind Ellie is very well suited to this kind of agile thinking, where we want to be certain that we are producing something of value every time we develop something. So every iteration, be that a small sprint or whatever, is always tied to actual business needs and therefore always producing value, rather than just, building a massive project and doing things for years and then expecting that at the end some value will come out. This is also a very key thing for us.
Yeah, so one of the things we hear often, Juha, I hear this and I see it and I read it, is businesses say they want to be data-driven. My argument is that you really don't want to be data-driven. You want to be information-driven. If we think about the knowledge pyramid, right, the bottom rung is data. The next rung, as you move in maturity, is going to be knowledge, right, or information. And from information, we lead to knowledge, and from knowledge, we lead to wisdom. So my question to the business is, why on earth would you want to stay on the bottom rung? If you're looking for continuous improvement, you want to move up that rung from data to information. So I believe that what a business really wants is information. They want to be information driven.
Precisely. And that is a great segue to thinking about this data value chain, which in a very, very simplified form we have here. So how do you get value out of data? How we see this at Ellie is that you have your business, you have the data about that business, you're analyzing it, you get some insights, and then you do something that affects the real business, therefore giving you value in terms of dollars like we have there, or in other ways. And what we are saying today is that Data Vault actually starts at the business. You can't just think that you're doing Data Vault purely within the context of technical data-related work. You have to start from the beginning. And the kind of sad reality is this, that the business is often kind of separated from the very, very technological data work. There's a gap. There's a gap between the business and the data that we have about the business and what we are doing with that data. That makes the value delivery extremely difficult, because the whole technological data work is barely connected to the real life business problems and processes. So our, let's say, thesis here today is that, first of all, Ellie is designed to be the bridge over that gap, so that you can always find out what sorts of things exist in the business that you have data about, and therefore you can kind of tie the whole data work to real life. And we're also saying that Data Vault thinking has to encompass this whole value chain, not just the part where you have this technological data work going on within the kind of scope of that data part there. So making the analysis and insights and even the actions actually something that we take into account and that we utilize in the designs that we do in the data part. And as you can see, you get more dollars out of this. That's the thesis here. So a couple of words then about the data-driven, business-driven data modeling thinking behind Ellie. If some of you were on our last webinar in October last year, we had Alec Sharp there, and I have a quote from Alec here saying the data model is a description of a business in terms of the things it needs to know about. So this is actually very core to us. It means that we want to understand the business, to understand the data, and to understand the data, we have to understand the business, and it goes like both ways at all times. We have to be linking these together. Business concepts that we model are linked to those physical systems and everything, of course, but they are actually comprised of the people and processes and technology that happens in the real life business. And that's why when we model things with Ellie and we do this kind of bridging the gap modeling between business and IT, we're modeling real life entities. We're not modeling database tables at that stage. And that gives you basically sort of blueprint for data development initiatives. It might be Data Vault, might be something else. And I think the last line there, which is somewhat behind our faces, no, that's better, is I think, Cindy, that's one of the things that we're going to be talking, or we are talking about today, is how the concepts are linked to these terms that are linked to the business keys, and the business keys are actually key to this whole thing, right?
That is correct. One of the things that we actually teach in the CDVP2 class to our students, that you always start with the business concepts, right? And we teach them how to develop an extended taxonomy so that they understand the way that the business sees its data in its own terms, right? So from an extended taxonomy, which Alex actually talked about a little bit when he was on your webinar earlier, we can begin to associate the terms in business terms to business keys, from business keys to the business processes and the systems that house those keys, and then down to the data itself. It's just unfortunate that most people that start with the Data Vault focus on the model, and nothing could be further from the truth as far as where the focus should be. So the work we do with the conceptual model, with the extended taxonomy, just naturally lends itself to a data model if you're doing this properly. I just want to say a good data warehouse is positioned to answer the questions that the business poses. A great data warehouse provides the analytics about the data supply chain and the data as it moves through the business processes. So we really want to tie everything we do, every project that we start with regard to data warehousing, we want to tie it back to the business processes and then to the business concepts, right? And kind of pull that red thread all the way from concept all the way out to our outcomes and our information delivery layer. And that provides a great closed loop, because from those outcomes, we come back to the business and their concepts and say, did we answer your question? Right? So it's just a natural progression of a model to start with the business concept. That's exactly where you need to be, because it's the business that you're serving.
Precisely, and I would say that the questions that the business wants to ask are always presented in terms of actual business terms. Like, they are not going to be talking about questions on, they don't want to ask questions about tables in a system. They want to ask questions about invoices and customers and so on.
Exactly.
And a model which gathers that information on that level might look like something like this. So this is a model in Ellie. I hope I can show you a very, very, very brief demo about how this would be done. But as we model things with Ellie, we're doing this business-driven modeling. We're modeling the things that exist in the business. We're not even interested in tables and files and clouds at this point. We're saying that you have factories, production lines, and products and customers, whatnot, and this is the kind of blueprint for all the rest of the work.
Yep.
So about the data vault itself, then, of course, there are different ways of doing data warehousing, but data vault has been around for a couple of decades at least now, and it's really gathering speed. Everyone's talking about data vault. So Cindy, why is this? Why are we going into this direction?
Well, I think in part it's because typical warehouses that have been built based on modeling, for example, third normal form or a Kimball star schema type of modeling, have failed. And I would add to that many of the data lakes that have been built to sort of be the silver bullet are failing also. And you cannot get away from the importance of business keys and the importance of understanding your data. In Data Vault, we say keys are king, right? You must have a key to have any kind of understanding of your data, to be honest with you. And so what we want to do is we want to provide an auditable source, right? So that's the other piece, is that a lot of consumers of the data warehouses don't trust the data. Right, and so we want to make sure that what we're delivering is the business concepts, right, delivered in an auditable and trustworthy manner, so that the business can actually get value. I mean, why do we build a warehouse in the first place if we're not bringing business value? And you mentioned agility, and I'll just say this very quickly. One of the goals and one of the things we teach in our classes is that when you take the Data Vault approach, part of the approach, as you said, people, process, and technology. And so on the people side of things, part of the methodology talks about how to build and work in an agile fashion, how to build your team. And part of that team building and that development process at an agile level is scope, right? And so when you scope something properly, you can deliver value, and that is what we try to emphasize in class and teach our students. You want to deliver value to the business with every single release. And so that's one of the things that the Data Vault teaches, because it's not just a model, right? It's a methodology, it's an architecture, and it's an implementation. It teaches you not just what to build, but how to build it, which is why we have standards. So,
yeah, I think that's an extremely good point to make here, that we are talking about a whole set of methodology here. I would say even a paradigm of doing data warehousing, and this is a well defined, well tested whole thing that you are training people, you are giving out certificates, and there are different tools and so on, and this is available globally. It's not just something that we're saying that, hey, you should draw your model this way. It's a whole set of defined things that you should be doing in order to get these benefits. And
sorry, one of the things you and I were talking about earlier is that one of the more difficult things with Data Vault is that it's not a product. You can't pull it off the shelf and implement it. Like, it's not data warehouse in a box, right? You have to have knowledge of your data, and you want to bring that into your build. And so oftentimes management is looking for that silver bullet. Well, if I just buy this technology, right, then I'm going to have all my problems solved. And it doesn't work that way. It's not a product. You want to learn the methodology and the architecture. You want to understand the model, right, and how to implement. Okay, because that's, how you implement something is just as important as, what you're building as far as your design is concerned. And so those are the things we teach in class. As you mentioned, globally, we have authorized training partners across the globe that are certified to teach this class. And so, and I know you guys have done a great job with, sort of allowing me to teach in Finland, which I absolutely love. But anyway, yeah, it's not a product you pull off the shelf.
Yeah. Give me one data vault, please. Yeah. Right. One interesting thing about Data Vault now is that as technology progresses, there have been quite a number of tools aimed at making Data Vault development and design easier. And we have listed here a couple of bullet points about reasons why Data Vault is so suitable for automation, and perhaps also in the sense of why is it good to automate Data Vault. If I may start with a few of these points, Cindy, I'd like to point out that especially I think that from the point of view of how consistent the patterns in Data Vault design are, and how driven by the metadata it is, that this is something that is very sort of on a very fertile ground to be automated, as there's in the end very little customization and sort of decisions to be made by humans, in the sense as long as you follow the taxonomy, you find the business keys and so on. And from that kind of high level design, this whole sort of living and running Data Vault is actually something that machines can handle pretty well. And the other thing I'd like to mention here is the second bullet point on left, saying that this is actually, because it is a methodology of doing things, it's completely agnostic when it comes to platforms and technologies and everything. So it doesn't matter whether you're doing on-prem or in cloud or whatever, or what do you have as a database solution. It's all good. And I think there's sort of the beauty of the Data Vault design and the methodology that, well, as we mentioned there, the kind of set logic math applies everywhere. It's so pattern based that even though the end result might be kind of quite broad and perhaps as such difficult to understand for someone, it's always based on very clarified and defined rules from which you can then derive all kinds of outputs and outcomes, as you said, Cindy.
That's right. The other thing that we like to point out, and we try to encourage our students when we're talking about Data Vault, because it's mathematically based, right? It is an engineered solution. It really, truly is. And so based on that set logic and that set math that's at the foundation of everything, not just the model, the processes, the way that we work, right? So when you implement a Data Vault, and it is a metadata-driven warehouse that you are developing, right? Which, as you said, lends itself naturally to automation tools because it's pattern-based, consistent, repeatable types of objects, even processes, right? And when you do that, what has typically happened in our industry with warehousing is, you have your IT team, and like 80% of their time is spent just trying to get data into the warehouse, right? And 20% of their time is spent trying to get business questions answered to bring value, right? Because dumping data into the data warehouse has little value to the business, right? And what we tell students is when you can automate and accelerate delivery, when you have a metadata-driven methodology, a metadata-driven model, metadata-driven processes, you flip that 80-20 around so that you're only spending 20% of your time just trying to get data into, ingesting data, if you will, into the raw vault, into the data warehouse. And you're able to spend 80% of your time answering business questions, which is where the value is in the first place.
Absolutely. And another thing is that as the Data Vault pattern is so easily expanded and scalable. It's something that kind of naturally also lends itself to automation, because you don't have to worry about, like, if you're adding new data sources and new entities into your model, you don't have to worry about refactoring everything. You can just keep pushing things into it. And I think that's also the sort of beauty of the data vault design in that sense.
Right.
I think the last line that we have there on the slide about how Ellie's model outputs are good starting point for automation actually works as a nice segue for this picture here, as we consider Ellie to be there. If you consider a list of tools that you might use in different phases of the data vault design and architecture, that Ellie is there to basically capture the structure and the meaning of those business needs and questions and terms and concepts, and then to push that onwards to the tools that actually create the physical data vault structures and so on. But we have to see this all as part of the same data vault work. It's not like that, let's say we have Warescape as an example here, but you could have myriads of tools there. It's not just the Warescape that is the data vault tool. It does some things of the data vault process. And we're actually going to be talking about the data vault process in just a couple of slides, I think. And this is something that is very good to understand, that we're saying data vault is now way more than just the logical model of that data warehouse that you're building. There's a right way of doing this, and that is to keep your design focused on those real business needs. So we have to take one matter here to this discussion, which is something that we run into in the real world, in the messy real world, and that is the question of business-focused versus source-based data vaults. And as we've been saying now quite a lot in this webinar already, it's all about those business keys to keep this together. So if you are focusing on the business keys, you're doing things right. But if you're focusing on something else like source system structures, you're doing things wrong. Isn't that right, Cindy?
That's correct. Oftentimes people look at because we're IT, right? We're used to working with data and systems, right? Our natural tendency is to, when we're asked to pull in data, is to look at the source systems. And even in the source systems, look at the primary keys, if you will, on the tables, right? And we start thinking in terms of primary keys from a technical perspective, right? What's really critical is that we understand that a lot of the source systems from primary key perspective are not reflective of the business concepts themselves, right? They're not really designed for that. And so when we pull primary keys and things out of the source system, when we design our warehouses that way, we basically are building a source system and just storing its data, right? It's siloed. And a siloed system, which is why we talk about we don't build source system data vaults, it eliminates the true impact that a well-designed data warehouse has. What the business wants is an integrated perspective of their data. And the reason they can't get those answers now is because they'll go to one system and get an answer out of this one, and another system and get an answer out of this one. What they want is that integration. So if all we're doing is modeling the source system in our warehouse, we're not really bringing the value we could be bringing. We want an enterprise integrated data warehouse. That is what we want to build for our businesses.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, and I would even say that even if you were sort of using the hubs and links and satellites and all sorts of structures there, it isn't really a data vault if you're focusing on the source systems and so on. And it doesn't really bring any additional value. Okay, you get the cool like you can get the history of changes and whatnot, but I mean, what's the point there? You're still kind of repeating the structure that is already existing in the source systems, and it is not integrated around the real business concepts.
That's right.
And that's why the process, which I think is the next slide, yes, the process, as we've defined it here in sort of very loose terms, always has to involve the beginning. That you start from a business need, you create a conceptual model of what are these things that I have data about, and then you create the taxonomy, you identify the business keys, you figure out what are the entities that the business is actually interested in, and then you figure out what sort of data vault comes out of that, and then you figure out where are the systems from which this data comes from, and how do I integrate around these real-life business entities, rather than starting from looking at the source systems and saying, hey, well, I think I could put this source system data into a data vault structure like this. That's not the point. You have to start from those business entities.
Right. I was going to just say we
Go ahead.
integrate on business concept.
Precisely. That's the point. And on tooling, a couple of notes here also that Ellie, of course, is meant for that business/IT discussion to create those conceptual data models to understand the meaning and the content of the information. So Ellie is something that can help you in those first phases. And then when you are ready with that, you can move to the so-called data vault automation tools. You could have your Warescape, you could have other tools, VaultSpeed, whatever in there. And there's a lot of different options on what sort of tools to utilize. Some of them do the whole thing. Some of them let you do the design and automate the ELT process creation, but they don't necessarily handle the scheduling, so I have to figure out something else there or something. But there's a bunch of these tools, and the thing is that they do this very, very well. So there's kind of no point in writing all the code yourself. But you also have to remember that the kind of data vault physical design automation tool is not going to probably not going to solve your problem about those business keys and what is the real structure of the information content. That is something you have to remember.
Yeah, as a team, you have to understand how to communicate with the business and collaborate. We talked about Agile earlier. I'll just say really quickly, collaboration is critical. So IT using a tool like Ellie, which I love, Ellie's made for the business. A business user can use this, and it's a great tool for the business to be able to visually articulate its concepts, the way it believes that its business is run and its business processes work, to IT. So
precisely. Yeah. Thank you for the kind words. Let's have a look at an example. Now, this is just a business process here that might be familiar to some people who have been on Cindy's classes. It's using some of the same examples here, with permissions, of course. But this is, of course, now just a simple business process of figuring out how to collect late payments. And we're not talking about anything related to data vault. We're not talking about anything related to data even here. This is just the business process. So you send the collection letters and figuring out, are the payments here? Not yet. Okay, what do we do? Someone has to call the customer, and perhaps we have to write off the whole invoice and stuff like that. So this is how the everyday business works. What we do at this stage when we want to figure out how to utilize the data related to this is to identify the concepts, identify the things in the business which have those important business keys that are going to be the core of the data vault structure we do. So here, for example, we identify that, hey, we're now talking about customers and invoices. And perhaps I would even spot that perhaps even the payment is something that is interesting from the business point of view. And from these nouns, basically, in the story of this business process, we can identify the entities that we need to model. And now I'd like to step in for a moment to Ellie to show you just in a very short example how we would model something like this. So let's see, I'll stop the presentation for a moment there. Screen share on. So what you're seeing now here is my personal Ellie environment. One of the great perks of working at Ellie, get my own environment. And I'm not going to go through all of this. We don't have time for full Ellie demo here, but I'm creating a new model. And this is now the late payments collection. And we're modeling the things. Oh, I have that. Okay, interesting. Number 2. All right. So we are modeling the actual business process contents there, and we are saying, okay, there were customers. Okay, so Ellie recognizes I have customers in my glossary already. That's perfect. I'm using that, and they had invoices. That's good. Yes, we also have that. probably the invoices are coming from certain products that they have bought. So of course I would be doing this with a real life business expert. I'm not an invoicing expert myself, but this is something that we could do. And we could identify from the story of the business process that yes, actually the customers are getting invoices because they have bought some products. This might probably be a many-to-many relationship. And there are payments relating to payment. I have also here payments related to the invoices. The customer might pay it in one go or in several different, and so on and so forth. And we would draw out these concepts and how they relate to each other. So this is not the process diagram, it's a diagram of the information content within that process. And we would discuss with the business people, and we would perhaps identify that actually there are two kinds of customers. They are actually companies, and there are different rules and so on for them compared to persons. So we kind of have two types of customers. We have individuals and organizations here, and so on and so forth. And then we would go and figure out, as we start the taxonomy work, figure out, all right, what is the product? Oh, is it something we sell? Well, fine. And perhaps figure out what sort of business key it has. There might be some sort of product ID or name or whatever, which we use across the organization to identify our products. But that would be the sort of work we can do with Ellie here. And this starts to give us the blueprint for the data vault, and we have to identify those business keys to get there. But I think that's about enough for Ellie. So let's get back to the presentation. There we go. So that was an example process, a very quick conceptual model based on this example process here. So you saw we identified those things, and we can start to figure out what the business keys are, and so on and so forth. Now, this, of course, leads to the interesting question that we have, of course, the conceptual model, and we have the data vault physical model there, and eventually we have the analytics solutions and reports and whatnot. So how do we tie all this together? And it's basically all about those business keys. Surprise, surprise. So what we have tried to explain here with Cindy, with this slide, is that there are kind of two different lineages in play here, or let's say lineage via business key from two different directions. One is the kind of sort of traditional data lineage thing that you know that this data item came through the data vault through all these layers from this particular source system. So that's what data vault does well. It handles this whole lineage thing through those different layers. You always know where the data came from. But we also have a lineage in the modeling sense, saying that, all right, now that I know what the business key for a product or a customer is, I can track that down from my conceptual model to the logical model of those data vault entities to the physical model of those data tables that we create in the database for the data warehouse, all the way to the reports and whatnot, which are actually utilizing that data. And as long as you keep the real life business key in there, everything ties together. And this gives you the auditability and the end-to-end visibility, which is so important.
I agree. The traceability of the business concept to the logical data model and then out to the physical model, it ensures that lineage from concept to business outcome, or information delivery becomes, again, it's that closed loop approach that we're using there. Mm-hmm. Having those business concepts visually articulated that translate ultimately to outcomes in information delivery has tremendous value to the business. And it helps IT also, as I said before, when we take something like we did with that use case of collection letters, for example, that is something on a single page, if you will, you've stated a problem, if you will, and a process, you've identified the keys, and now you're going to be able to develop an outcome. That's something that could be done in a single sprint, right? So we're always trying to scope to deliver value with every release.
Mm. And the key thing is at all times, everything's focused on the business keys. And that's how we can say that, hey, now that we are in this release of the data vault, whatever, we are bringing data about these business keys to your use, and you can link them and so on and so forth. So that that is always the scope. The scope is not like that we are taking this table from the source system and giving the data for you. That's not interesting. It's interesting that we are giving you data about invoices. That's immediately interesting.
Right. Well, the other thing you point out on this slide is this whole concept of cross-functional view of the business's data, which is, again, that integrated enterprise data warehouse approach to answering business questions. And we're able to actually introduce a lot of governance, right? One of the things that gets derived out of a data vault is master data for the business. And so we have this concept of enabling data governance again, and security. You talk about access controls here, right? All of that is embedded into the solution, right? And so when you have that, you've got your lineage coming in from your concepts all the way through your model out to your data elements, right? And so if you think about security, really quickly, if you think about security, if you can trace your concepts, right, and there's specific concepts that only certain, we'll say certain users should see, right, and you're drilling that all the way through and you're bringing that through down to the data elements themselves, that conceptual model can also show you where areas are in your warehouse that need to be secured, right, where you need a little more, data security and your governance policies that need to inform that. So there's so much utility you can get out of the ability to look at and start with the concept of the business, and then have the business be able to visually see through that down to the data warehouse and then out to the outcomes.
Precisely, yeah, and I think it's so far so much easier to define like data governance rules and whatnot first on the conceptual level, that hey, we have certain rules about persons, rather than going that hey, we have certain rules about this particular table here. That's so much more complicated, and by using the business keys to track the person related data through this whole thing makes it easier.
Yep.
We have a couple of slides, or let's say one large example slide still left here. So we tried to kind of scope you a view of how this sort of a taxonomy thing might work. So how do these all things relate to each other? And let's say now that we start with the example process we had, and we find out that the business is talking about customers and bills. And these are good business terms, that's fine. But by doing the conceptual data modeling, we might identify that there are actually three concepts in play. The bills are basically just another word for those invoices. And as we identified in the example model there are actually two kinds of customers. There are corporations and there are individuals. So within the context of, let's say, different divisions of your company, one is doing B2B, one is doing B2C, the customer actually means two different things. It's a corporation or an individual. So you have to identify those real concepts. And from then on, you can start to identify the business keys. So what is the kind of real life key of this concept, and where can I find it? It might be so that a particular system, as Cindy you said earlier, might have a technical primary key for something, but that's not useful. It's not the real business key of the entity. And from that, as you create the kind of attributes or these business key attributes, you find the business key attributes for the concepts, you can start to track where these business keys are used. So you can find the processes in which these business keys move as you could say, like as tokens through the process steps. This is a process step where you create these business keys. This is where you update those. This is where they are perhaps deleted or whatever. And you can start to identify the systems in which these business keys move around. And again, you have to remember that business key might relate to several different sorts of technical primary keys in various systems.
Right.
And then the kind of only after that you can jump to the data vault structures, saying that, hey, well, these business keys that relate to the customers are such that I need to create hub tables for those. But the invoice here is actually a transaction. It's an association between the customer and the product. So it has to be a link table, and you create a link table which contains the invoice related data, or the satellites of which contain that. But nevertheless, So this is how you kind of move down from the terms that business uses in everyday life to the concepts, to the keys, and eventually to the data vault structures, the model itself, and then you already know where to get the data.
Right. I think we have one more slide too.
Yes, absolutely. Almost forgot the important thing. So those little boxes, of course, are the Ellie logos here, and we're saying that Ellie is a tool that can help you figure out the top part here. It can help you figure out what the business is saying when they're talking about bills or customers. It can help you figure out how these different concepts are actually divided into several sub-concepts or sub-entities in different contexts. And you can start to figure out what the business keys are, mark them down as an attribute there in Ellie. And that gives you the kind of upper layer of this whole thing, which you can utilize as a basis of your actual data vault design, which you do with your fancy data vault automation tool, of course.
That's right, and I really love this visual because it really does show how Ellie can help accelerate that. And I'm going to say this again. The thing that I really love about Ellie, this is why I always ask you to demo in my class. Juha demos in my class right before we go into our workshop session, because we talk about the importance of the business concept, right, and that natural progression into an extended taxonomy. And that's what you're seeing here, right? This is where we've captured the business concept, we understand the business terms, and now we're looking at the business processes and we're saying, okay, how do these keys move through the business, right? And how do we reflect that from these multiple source systems in an integrated fashion, all right, against the term and the terminology of the business in their words. The other thing that I just want to point out here too is that often the business uses the same terms, and across functional areas, they're actually talking about two completely different things. If you don't work with the business and collaborate with the business, sometimes they don't even realize that they're talking about two different things, right? I mean, you've run into that, correct?
Yeah. I've run into several situations actually where the business has problems with understanding the word customer, and there are issues where you don't really know how these different companies, individuals that interact with different divisions and parts of your company, how do you divide those into different kind of roles, and which of those kind of interactions are actually something that the customer does. And you might actually have something like ship to customers or bill to customers, and these might be completely different companies even within the scope of a single contract. So this is all kind of super complicated in the business side, and if we kind of blindly just implement a customer table somewhere, that there's no guarantee that that will actually reflect any of the reality that actually happens within the business process.
That's exactly right. And using something like this, a tool like this, it actually helps the business start to build out their entire, way of working. How does their business work, right? Even as an internal sort of value there. So, but it just lends itself naturally to building out a data vault properly and having it business focused and integrated on the business concepts.
Precisely. And I think there is pretty much the message that we had today, which is that we want the data vault to be integrated around the real business concepts, which have the real business keys, which provide you with the lineage, which provide you with the visibility and link to the actual business needs. That's kind of the whole key thing here. It's not just about the data vault model in your database. It's about how you link that to the actual real business.
Or
Cindy,
I'm going to say business or mission.
Oh yes, of course. Yeah. Cindy, we have a few questions from the chat, so now we have still some time for those.
Okay.
Let me pick a couple here. Oh yes, we have a great one. There's a question from Kent saying, how do you deliver deliver in an agile manner with the business conceptual model when you're starting from the business concepts? So how do you kind of deliver from that? Of course, now agile delivery, you might think that It has to be something that you code something in a week and then it comes out and provides value. But I would say perhaps this is something that I can answer, Cindy, just you comment on it if you like. But in my opinion, delivering things starting from the conceptual model in an agile fashion is no different than delivering without it. There's kind of one difference, which is that you're actually going to be delivering value. So it's not so that you would have to create a massive conceptual enterprise data model of everything you have. You can scope it out. You can say that I'm only interested in this late collections payment thing, and I will create the data model. I created it in maybe 2 minutes there. If you add a little bit more detail, maybe you can spend 15 minutes with that model. So it's part of your agile delivery process to create the models of those business problems that you are going to be solving, of those user stories that you are solving and delivering. And it's just one step in that process. And then you move on, you deliver that, and you move on to the next one. It's not so that you would create massive models of everything and then start to deliver individual pieces out of that. I would say that's the answer there.
I'd also add to that is with Data Vault, we tell you right up front, don't boil the ocean, right?
True.
And that's where oftentimes warehouses fail, because they fail to bring value to the business quickly, because they spend all their time trying to get all the data in, all the data. You spend a tremendous amount of time in that. If you're going to deliver in an agile fashion, you must scope. I always tell my students, scope, scope, scope. All right. And so using a conceptual model, it enables you to scope what you're going to deliver, right, to a very, we say keep your concepts and your taxonomy to a single page. If you can, and then you build, because a data vault is a very wide structure. The warehouse ends up being very wide because the concept is you bolt on. As is that Kent Graziano, then he knows this very well. You're bolting on constantly without having to re-engineer what you've already built. So if you start from that integrated perspective, as you add other data sources coming in, you're using what you have already built based on a concept, an integrated concept, and then you're bolting on new data sources or new concepts, if you will. So it's a wider structure, right? But when you do that, you can deliver and begin to build out the warehouse in a managed, sort of controlled manner that is constantly delivering value. Okay, and I hope that answers the question, Kent, too.
Yeah, I think it's a perfect answer for that, and I like it how Data Vault basically is built for enabling that incremental expansion from
Exactly.
your couple of first use cases, first concepts, and then you keep adding new concepts, and Data Vault just expands, and it's perfectly fine with that. You don't have to always recreate all the possible structures when you add something.
Well, it's new concepts. It's also new sources. So
True,
you may
of course.
you may have, if you have, 25 different sources of a certain concept, you're not going to build that in a single sprint. You're going to take what you can, maybe 2 or 3 of those sources, you're going to build it. And then in the next sprint, maybe you deliver source number, 3 and 4 or 4 and 5, right? So you're adding sources as you go as well. That's the other iterative approach to your development.
Precisely. We had one question from Daniel here saying that one criticism about Data Vault is that it is easy to get data into it, but hard to get data out. And this is due to the fact that few people understand how to build point-in-time bridge tables. Reason for that is that many articles and tutorials are focusing on the raw layer of the Data Vault, and very little attention is given to the business layer. So what are our thoughts on that? What do you say, Cindy? Is that true? Are we focusing, or are other people focusing on the raw layer too much?
Yeah, they are. And we tell people don't focus, first of all, on the model, because actually pits and bridges are not part of the core architecture, the core objects of a Data Vault model in the first place, right? So if you don't understand how to get data out, pits and bridges are amazing. They're sort of the secret sauce of getting data out in a highly, highly performant manner. And so we encourage and we teach people how to use pits and bridges, because they're critical to getting data out of the Data Vault. We have some large customers who have Data Vaults that have billions, and you were talking hundreds of terabytes of data, and they use pits and bridges extremely effectively. They can get data out of their data vault with that kind of volume with sub-second query results. And so when people say it's hard or it's slow getting data out, they're not educated. I hate to say it that way. They haven't been educated on how to properly get data out of a data vault, and they are highly performant objects in which you can do that with. So,
yeah, I think it's kind of two-pronged approach to that. One is that you have these tricks that you can do to make the data querying and so on faster and more efficient, but in the end, I think it is the basic idea that if you are building something just on the raw layer and expecting people to kind of merge things in the query end together to get the real business things that they are actually interested in, then you are not really providing actual value. And it's not a problem of the sort of technical structure there. It's the problem that you might not be actually providing those integrated business concepts in the first place. I think that's also an issue that we have seen a lot.
Well, and I think also it's part of not understanding the actual architecture of the warehouse itself. We have, both a horizontal division, if you will, of responsibilities, right? And we have vertical division of responsibilities. We used to teach in the course, which I really love the analogy, was you think about farm, kitchen, buffet, right? And the idea is that people put data into the raw vault, which is your farm, right? But you never give people the farm, right? You take the ingredients from the farm and you put them in the kitchen, right? And then the chef, who's the expert, right? We're talking about our provisioning, teams, our data scientists, right? They're going to take that raw ingredient and they're going to create, as I said before, information, curated information that's aggregated, and they're going to take that information, then they present it out to the buffet, right? This is where your consumers, and we call that our information delivery layer, right? Where we're provisioning and we're presenting, right? So you want people that know, first of all, how to pull the data together. So we don't generally open up the raw vault for people, right? We want to pull that together because that's our expertise. That's where we know how to utilize our platforms, right? Indexing, partitioning, all sorts of means that we have based that are platform specific that can help get the data out to the consumer, whether that's in a star schema, facts and dimensions, cubes, flat wide tables, web services, right? All of those things, BI tools, they're all consumers, even visualization tools, right? All of those things are virtualization tools as well. All of those things are consumers of the information that's been provisioned.
There's actually, we have maybe time for one more. We have a related question here. I'd like to answer this. How do you reconcile the business-centric approach with the fact that the raw data vault does not contain soft requirements? So how do we kind of get the data vault to be centered on these business concepts when the raw data vault kind of has to have very, very little in terms of transformations and whatnot, right?
That's a great question. I'm so glad someone answered that, boy. All right, so here's a question back. If our source systems are applying business rules and our user interfaces, right, we enter the data and the business rules are working in the back end and they're landing in our source systems with those business rules applied, why on earth, you can see I'm passionate about this, why on earth do we need to apply soft business rules to that data? Why? If the data has been processed in the source system, we are storing the raw data already processed. Why do we need to apply soft business rules in the first place? That's my question, right? What we have is data that's already processed through the business rules of the source systems. One of the things that Data Vault really brings to the surface is when those source systems are broken. And oftentimes I have students that want to reapply, say, relationship constraints inside the Data Vault because they were broken in the source system. And I tell them, don't do this, right? because one of the things with that feedback loop, and I'm going to try to do this quickly. One of the things we have to do, it's sort of a side benefit of building a data vault, is when you present the raw data to the business, you can show where the processes are broken. That is continuous improvement. All right. It's not just improving the information, it's improving the entire enterprise when we do things like that. So I tell them, don't apply soft business rules going into the raw vault. It should have already been processed. If it wasn't, then it's broken. All right. And then we take that raw data and we refine it. We have, data science results coming in. We have other types of summation and things going on and quality cleansing perhaps, right? That we're presenting back to the business. But those soft business rules that they're talking about, first of all, should have already been applied to the data. And we're just providing an enriched and refined result in our outcomes. Sorry, that is something I'm very passionate about.
I totally get it. I totally get what you're saying. I think that was an excellent answer. We are unfortunately now running out of time completely. So this is where we have to end. We have a bunch of links here, and this will be in the material and everything. And thank you all for joining us. Do visit everything here. There's the YouTube channel for Ellie, in which this webinar also will appear, I hope in a few days or next week. You can also find the previous webinar from there. And links to Data Rebels, Data Vault Alliance, and the conference that Cindy mentioned. Cindy, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Juha. It's been fun. I hope everybody had a good time and you didn't feel like you were being lectured at. So
I hope not. I hope not. No, this was a good lecture, I suppose.
Okay. Good discussion. Good discussion.
Yeah. Thank you all for being here, and let's be in touch.
All right.
Bye for now.